So who's used Ansible before? Cool, only a few. Great, so for those who haven't, and those who don't know what it is, Ansible is an IT automation tool useful for configuring systems, deploying software, and generally doing things in your IT environment. So the way it works is it uses SSH to connect to the host you want to manage. So you install it on a single machine. So for example, it's on my laptop. And then it'll use SSH in order to connect to the host that it's managing. You don't need to install any sort of agents or anything on the host you're managing. It just has to be on the machine you're managing it from, which makes it very easy to set up, very easy to use. And you can use it over VPNs or SSH tunnels, anything like that. Or for small tasks, big tasks, it doesn't matter. So Ansible operates on a principle called idempotence, which I can't spell. And for those who are curious, spelled like that. So that's idempotence. And what that is, it's the property of certain operations in maths and computer science, whereby you can run the operation again and again and will only make changes when it needs to, or usually the first time. So you can set up Ansible to run every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every hour, every day, it doesn't matter. It'll only make changes when it needs to make changes. So you think about if you've written a bash script in order to install some software and configure a system, you need to add conditionals in to make sure that if you've changed the config file, you restart the service. But if you haven't changed the file, you don't want to restart the service because restarting services is usually bad. In Ansible, it figures it out automatically for you, so you don't have to worry about that. It'll only restart the service when it needs to restart the service, which is really cool, and it's a very important concept in Ansible. Something that hopefully you'll get out of this. It's something that I didn't quite pick up when I first started using it. It's difficult until you get your head around it, then it's easy. Hopefully you'll figure it out, hopefully. So the aim for the next half an hour or so is to show you how to use Ansible by deploying 2 different PHP applications that I've written on 2 different servers. And I'm going to do that live. So we've got the 2 IP addresses up there. Feel free to load them on your computers, your phones, whatever. And they should, at the moment, not resolve anything. So you should see something like that, where page is not available. And then by the end of the talk, they should have actual applications on there, and that'll all be done using Ansible. No SSH connections at all will be done during the, no manual SSH connections will be done during the process of this talk. Okay, so there's quite a lot to cover, so I'm moving quite fast through it all. So I'm not expecting you to take it all in and remember everything. It's more about understanding and learning how Ansible works and getting a feel for it, so you can go away and learn it yourself and know where to look and to get it working. And I'll have a link at the end to the various code I've used for all the different things, as well as other things you can look at. This is actually based off DigitalOcean community tutorial that I wrote. And you can go look at that. There'll be a link at the end. Cool, so let's get started. So first of all, what we have to do first for Ansible is tell it what host we want to manage. So this is the Ansible host file, and we've got the 2 IP addresses there I mentioned before. So these are the 2 servers that we're going to connect to. They're both virtual machines running with DigitalOcean. I created them yesterday. I have not logged into them once. I actually created 8 yesterday. I've got backup plans. But these are the 2 we're going to be using. So as I said, I haven't logged into them once. They're brand new and fresh. And because of that, their login is currently root. Now, Ansible, because it uses SSH, logs in as the local user, which is Valoran on my machine, which means I need to tell Ansible to log in as the root user. So Ansible does that using host_vars folder, and in that you have a file for each host you're managing. So we'll take this first one up here, the 104.whatever, and we've got a file in here, 104.whatever, which is sitting in the host_vars folder. And you'll notice it's YAML format, and we've got here Ansible SSH user. So we're saying log in as the root user onto this host. We've also got repository down here, and that's the application we'll be deploying. We'll worry about that later. Second host we have is this one. Again, we're logging in as the root user, and we've got a different repository here because it's a different application, so we'll worry about that one later. So now Ansible knows what host to connect to and how to connect to them. We should be able to connect. So in Ansible, the simplest example I could come up with for an Ansible command is this. Can you all see the command at the bottom? Nodding? Cool. Okay, so Ansible servers-mping, and you'll see I haven't logged into these before. So what we're saying here is run Ansible on the servers host group module. So in the host file, we've got servers. And that relates directly to servers there. -mping says use the ping module. The ping module is a ping. It just makes sure it connect to it. And it should come back green if we can connect. As you can see, it is. I'll just scroll that up for a sec. As you can see, we've connected fine. So that's working. So you can run all Ansible commands using a direct line like that. But that'd be no different from writing a shell script, really. What we want is something more powerful. So Ansible has a thing called a playbook. And the way the playbooks work is that you define a list of modules or a list of tasks that Ansible will perform on the server. You could also think of it as a list of states or a definition of the state that you want the host to be in, and Ansible will work through it and apply it. So here we have the simplest example of a playbook that I could come up with, which does exactly the same as the command we just ran before. And I'll run it like this. So Ansible-playbook servers. So at the top, in YAML format, you'll notice, we're running it on the server's host group, then we're running the ping task. And down here, we've got green ping. So that's successful. Ansible can talk to them, and it's run the first task. So let's actually do something more interesting now. My memory is terrible, and my typing is shocking sometimes, so I'm going to cheat and just uncomment everything, because it actually means stuff will work. So first of all, what you need, if you're installing services and things on your host, you'll obviously need some sort of root privileges. Now normally when you're working on servers, you won't have everything logging in as the root user. You'll be logging in as a sudo-enabled user. So Ansible supports that with the become option, which used to be called sudo, but they changed it to become to make it a bit more generic. And what we're saying here is become yes, what we're saying means become the root user. Get your root privileges in order to do the task by default. And we'll look at a command that actually disables that and logs in as a specific user later on. So what I've got here, if you do have a password for the sudo account, you can pass it in as a parameter on the command line. Then it will ask you the password when you run the command. So it makes that nice and easy. So now to actually do something interesting. So I'll comment this lot, save, and run. Cool. OK, so what we've got here is the apt module, Ansible module. So first line, name, install packages. That's just the name of the task. You can call it whatever you want. Next up, apt. So the apt module, name, item. So what we're saying here is the package you want to install is the item here, which is a variable, and it comes from this with items list. So these are all the packages you want to install. Notice mcrypt, Ben, from Sydney, and all the other packages that we need to install on our server in order to run our application. Cool, so that's, and what Ansible will do, it'll go through each different items in that list and it'll make sure they're installed. We've got state latest, so you install the latest copy of that package, then update cache and cache valid time, make sure that apt-get update will be run once every hour so that it won't slow down the playbook too much if you run it repeatedly. And wow, the internet's running fast today, that's good. So down here you'll notice these are two green under change. So what that means is Ansible has changed something, a change has happened on that task, which translates to the packages are installed. So if we go over here to our web browsers and refresh them, Nginx is working. There we go. So Ansible is actually doing something. Oh. I wasn't expecting that so early. Cool. OK, so things are working. This is going well. OK, so now that we've got packages installed in our server, let's see what's next on the list. I'll comment this lot and run it. OK, so what do we do? So first of all, we need to enable mcrypt because our applications require it. So mcrypt is enabled using PHP 5 nmod mcrypt command. And because there isn't an Ansible module for that, we're going to use the shell module instead. And the shell module accepts, it runs commands on the host basically. And so that's quite easy. But the thing about shell is it doesn't understand if it's run or not, so you need to account for idempotence. And that's where args create comes in. So what we're saying here is that when this command runs, it creates that file. And it will only run that command if the file does not exist. And because we know that when we enable mcrypt, it will create that file, we know we can check for it before running that command. Nice and simple. Down here, we're going to enable the firewall. So enable UFW. We're going to open port SSH and open the HTTP port as well. And hopefully that should stop any of you from trying to hack into my server. Because it'll only accept traffic in from the two ports that we actually want it to accept it in from. Next up, we've got something a bit more interesting, which is the line in file module. So what line in file does is it looks for a specific line, it ensures that a specific line exists in a file. So in this case, we've got the PHP ini file, and we want to make sure that that line there, so this bit here, exists in that file. And line in file has a number of different options you can use. In this case, we're using the regex. So we're looking to see if that regex pattern is found in the file. And if it is, it will replace it with the line that we want. If it doesn't exist, it will create a new line at the end of the file that has the line that we want. And so this will ensure that we've have that option set in that file. And because we've changed the configuration of PHP, we need to restart services. So we're going to do that using the handlers. So we're notifying these two handlers here. And as you can see, we've got restart nginx, relates to this one, and restart PHP5 FPM relates to this one. And so these are the handlers. So they will only be run when they're told to run. And the notify only notifies the handlers to run when there's a change that happened. And it will run at the end. So you can have 5 different tasks notifying the same handler. The handler will only run once at the end when the playbook's finished processing, which is quite handy. Cool, so that's happened. If we refresh these, we shouldn't notice any changes because we haven't actually changed anything that would be reflected up there. And I'll just throw this at the bottom because it goes at the bottom of the file. Cool, okay, so what's next? Let that run. Okay, so next up, because we're deploying our application, we need a directory to install it in. So we're going to create var www apt, or app. We're going to use the file module for that. So file module here, destination is var www app, then state directory. So this says make sure that directory exists at that destination. And then the line under it, we're setting the owner and permission. So we want it to be owned by the web user, www.data. Next up, we've got the nginx configuration. And here we're using something new called the template. So the way the template works is you tell it a template file that's on the local host, so it's on my laptop, and tell it where it has to go. So we're saying the nginx.conf template file has to go into that location, because that's the default website configuration file. And so we look in nginx.conf. It should look fairly familiar for anyone who's configured nginx before. And we've got this curious line up here. So you'll notice, again, we have a variable up here, so the inventory underscore hostname. Now, you can use whatever variables you want in the template files, and you can also use conditionals and loops, which makes it really powerful. You can have incredibly complicated configuration files built using the template system that are different for every single host, but configured through the exact same task simply by using variables and conditionals, which makes it really, really cool. And I've actually, for some of my servers at home, I've got this set up for my backup script. Some have got, Postgres databases, some have got MySQL, some have got TaskSnap, and it just figures it all out. And the backup script only runs the backups it needs to run for those hosts. So it's very cool. So that's the template. And then finally, the bit that starts making things interesting is clone. So what we're doing here is we're going to clone our repositories. So git module, destination var www app, and repo. So that's the variable from the files here. So this one is the combination, and this one is shoutbox. So this will check out the two repositories, one on each of the hosts. And then here we've got become and become user. We wanted to run it as the www.data user, so and give it the right permissions. So now that is run, because it should have run, if we go over here and refresh these, we should see something new. Fantastic. Okay, things are happening. So the one on the left, it's got a nice PHP error and nothing's displaying because it can't find anything. You can probably guess what the problem is. One on the right here, I've built specially, and this will tell us what has to happen next for the rest of the talk. So we'll go through each step down the page and light everything up. So first of all, as you can see, we need Composer. So how do we do that? Cool. Okay, so installing Composer, again, we're going to use shell script. So I've just grabbed the standard Composer install command from the website and running that in shell and using arg creates to look for the Composer file. Fairly simple, we've seen that before. And then we're going to do another shell script for running Composer create project, which has got a couple of different options in here. So we've got chdir, so run it in that directory, and we've got creates again. So creates can also look for directories. It doesn't have to be a file. As you can see here, we're looking for the vendor directory that Composer will create. And then finally, we've got become and become user again for permissions reasons. And that's going to do its thing. So it's worth pointing out that there's actually a Composer module in Ansible, but it's very buggy. Create project always returns an unchanged status even though it has actually changed things, which is really, really annoying and quite dangerous when your application, as part of the post-create scripts, actually sets up the key for the application. So every time you run Ansible and this module, it will reset up, you'll replace the encryption key with something new. which breaks all your database passwords, and it just gets ugly. So I use the shell script because it's just simpler. Shell module, sorry. Cool, as you can see, we now have a nice big green, so the application's working. We refresh this one, it's still not going to display anything. Okay. So the other application is still taking its time to load, which is fine. It's that one, this one's a full Laravel application, that one's only Lumen, so that's got more dependencies to download, and sometimes Composer or Git takes a little bit longer. So let that do its thing, and it doesn't get interesting until later on anyway, so it's fine. So what's next? Well, next up we want to do is our environment variables. So if we look back over here, next on the list, as I should have mentioned before, we've got env. So in Laravel, we've got an .env file which has the different environmental settings. So in this case, what we want to do is disable debug mode. We want to enable production mode. So we're using the line in file module that I mentioned before, which will make sure that we've got app debug equals false and app env production is in that line. So go back over here now. There we go. So now we've got a nice big error showing up. And that's because debug mode is currently on. So when this finishes running, it should hide the error. There we go. And that should light up in a moment too. There we go. Cool. So next up, we need a database connection. This is the fun bit. As you can see, there's quite a few steps. Awesome. Okay. Okay, so first of all, what we need is to create our database. So Ansible has a MySQL_DB module, which creates databases. So what we're saying here is create me a database called app. Very simple. Next up, we need a password for our database user. So what we're going to do is use the make_passwd command to generate a 32-character password, and then we're going to register that in the variable dbpwd. So the output of that command will be now available to Ansible. We're also going to look for this file here, which we will create in a later task, so that once the password's been generated, once we don't regenerate a new database password. Next up, we want to create the database user. So the MySQL_user module, we've got the app is the username this time, and we've got the password is the standard out of dbpwd, which is the password we just created using make_passwd. As you can see, we registered the variable here, so now we're using it. And then privileges app, so giving it the right privileges. And this one, so when dbpwd.changed. So this means only run this module, only run this task when the variable is changed, which means that this will only run and create a user when a password is generated through here. And the only reason that will run is if this file doesn't exist, which we haven't created yet. We'll get to that in a second. And next up, fairly simple, we've got the line in file. So we're going to configure the .env file with our database, our username, our password. Again, we're using a when here and the standard out. And finally, we're creating a new file to save our database password. So we've got the line in file module. But this time, we've got this in here as well. So we're saying if the file doesn't exist, create it. So it's going to create our file. Then it's going to save as a line in that file the password that it generated. And then the previous task that's generating the password will see this file, and it won't run again because it's already generated the password. A little bit cyclic, but it works. Cool, so, and then it looks like that's run already. So if we go over here, we now have a database connection. Yay. And that one's still not working because we need database tables. So in Laravel, we have a PHP artisan migrate command. So I run that. So this is, again, another shell script, and that's it there, which is PHP artisan migrate, and we've got false in there because it's production mode. And also we're going to be a little bit sneaky here because we need to tell Ansible when it's run. And so we're just going to pipe the output of the command directly into a file, and then we're going to look for the file. Nice and simple. It's a great little trick you can do that you might not think of, but because it's a shell script, you can do whatever you want in it. And then it makes sure that you can actually keep idempotency with random commands like this that need to be run on the first time. So now if we go over here, database tables over here, and we have a shout box. So, if you've got your phones or computers open, please feel free to start typing stuff in and see what you can do to it. Wait a few moments. Or not. You might notice that my caps lock is on and nothing is coming through. So you've probably guessed by now that it's not that simple. We still have a scheduler to set up before it'll do anything, as well as a queue worker, because I built the world's slowest shout box ever. But that's okay, we can work with that. So, the scheduler, how do we do that? So Laravel scheduler is another artisan command. So PHP artisan schedule run. And so you set that up via cron to run every minute. And then Ansible will create that in cron when you run it, and then it'll run every minute. So the Ansible cron module is an interesting module because it has a lot of different options, and it really proves that most Ansible modules you can access all the different system features that are available. So if we look in, so Ansible has a list of all modules on the website, which is a fantastic reference. You should check out if you're ever trying to work out what module to use in Ansible, how to use it. So if we look for the cron module here, open this up, it gives us the synopsis, so a summary of what it does, and then all of the different options that it supports. And so we'll look at this one, it's a special time here. So if you know anything about cron, you'll know that you can do an @reboot or @yearly at the start of the cron line, and it'll run the cron on reboot or yearly or whatever. Ansible supports that. You can also give it the minute and the month and the hour and the everything. And so most of the Ansible modules are like this, where it gives you all of the different options that are available directly through Ansible, which makes it really easy to configure complicated setups. And you also get a list of examples at the bottom of the documentation page as well. So if you're ever unsure of how to do something, there might be an example in there. There's usually something that's helpful. So now that's run, if we look over here, Chatbox is now talking. This is a background script, so every minute it's going to say something random into the Chatbox because we need to bring up the queue worker until it'll actually start repeating the stuff that everyone's been typing into the box. So, oh, that's right. The other thing to mention with cron is the name is important. The name is unique, and that's what Ansible checks for when it's setting up crons. So if you loop through different items to create crons and you provide the same name, they will override each other and things get ugly. So you need to have a unique name for each cron entry because it doesn't look at the command. It doesn't mean that you can change the command and the timing as much as you like. It's just the name that has to stay the same, which I would assume is why they designed it that way. So the queue worker. Well, a lot of people would think when you're setting up a queue worker, you'd use something like supervisor D. I personally don't like that option because you have to set it up in root, you have to run it as root, you have to restart it as root. It's just painful. I prefer using cron and a little command called run1, which is a utility on Ubuntu that ensures that only a single instance of the command is running at any one point. And so I set up a cron job to run every 5 minutes or so with the qwork daemon command. And run1 will make sure that it's running. If cron runs and it's already running and won't do anything, it's done. If it isn't running and the cron runs, it will start it for you. So that's a handy little hint. That's what I do. So again, here we're creating up a cron job. We've named Laravel queue worker, and that's going to create a queue job for the queue worker. I'll just wait for that to tick through, and that should light up to green. So the chat box is still randomly talking to itself about how bad the design it is. So interesting, I see when I was testing this talk at home and via fudging on the phone, it was taking quite a while to go through the playbook because it's got to do an SSH connection for every different task it's running. But the internet at this uni is impressively fast. That's faster than I've seen it run. So yeah, probably going to finish early, which is a surprise because usually I've been waiting for Ansible to finish. So that's finished running, and we'll just wait for that to light up. So while that's doing its thing, just point out something else we can look at in here. So if you notice in Ansible, we've got these green OKs. That means there were no changes. It didn't apply anything. So idempotency is working. Skipping here means that there was a condition. Oh, here we go. It's loading up what everyone's saying. Yay, lots of people will be talking. Cool. Okay, so as I said, skipping is when there's a when condition or something. If the condition isn't met, it'll skip it. And then finally you've got change. So that's when it actually made a change. So it's quite good because you can see things. You can see when things have changed when you run it. And if there are no changes and you're not expecting any changes, then you know everything's okay. Which leads me on to the final point. So you're probably wondering what the question marks are. And when you're programming, what you often, you'll play around with something for a while. And when you've finished it, you often go back and you refactor. You clean up what you've been working on. And Laravel's not Laravel, what am I saying? Ansible is no different. You, once you build your playbook and get it working, you often want to go back and refactor it and clean it up. The benefit of Ansible is that part of the refactoring, you can rely on idempotence, kind of like unit tests in a way, whereby you can refactor your playbook and then rerun it, and if there were no unexpected changes, your refactoring hasn't broken anything because it hasn't done anything unexpected. Instead, and if there are any changes, you do know what broke and you can go and fix it. So what we'll do is refactor our playbook. So currently, we've got various different conditions hanging on different steps. So the create project is looking for the vendor directory, and we've got migrations looking for the file that it created. But instead, what we want to do is hang it off the clone repository step. So when the repository is cloned, that's when we want to run the tasks that rely on that. So we'll add in here register cloned on the clone repository step. Then in create project, we'll get rid of that, and we'll hang it on clone changed. Look for any of the other options. So we'll leave the password one there, but we will, actually, no, there's one in the password we need to get rid of. Okay, so get rid of that. And then down, we want to get rid of the bit where it saves the password in the file. We don't need that anymore. The migrate, we can get rid of this out of the shell command. Get rid of that, put that there. They're all good. And then finally, we'll just clean up after ourselves and get rid of those extra files that were created. And we'll see we've got the handlers down here. Now if I run that, that should refactor it all. And I'll just get rid of those, because now it'll get rid of those temporary files. They won't be there anymore. It'd be safe to leave them there, because if the files don't exist, Ansible won't try and delete files that don't exist, so there won't be a problem. And then when that finishes running, you should see what happens there. Yeah, I'm not that stupid. Okay, I'll read that later. Cool, so that's finished. Wait for a few moments while the page refreshes. Thank you very much for listening. Link that joined in, please leave me comments and feedback. This is my first conference talk ever, so I really love your feedback. The second link, the src.id, that's my website. I've got links up there to all the different applications I built and the playbook, as well as links to my DigitalOcean tutorials on Ansible, so check that out. Also the list of all modules.